All right, there we go. I'm Anna Livermore from V.MORA, which is a company I founded in 2008 that helps launch fashion designers. We do patterns and samples and tech packs and source fabrics. We are not a manufacturer, but we have really strong manufacturing partners that we've been working with for over a decade. So they're vetted, they're amazing. Work with all different types of minimums, different types of products. So yeah, I put together today's live so we could talk about the top 10 mistakes I see new designers make. Now, hopefully, you're so new that you haven't had a chance to make any of these mistakes, which is great. But if you have made any of these mistakes, don't worry about it. It is normal to make mistakes when you're launching a company. I always like to remind my clients that I went to school for fashion design. I invested I don't even know how much. I went to a liberal arts school and it cost a lot of money. And I did not learn how to launch a company, run a business. I learned how to make pretty garments, sort of. But it was a big investment. And by launching your own company and making some mistakes, you've probably invested less money than I did in my college education. So you're still doing okay. But it's like an education. So if you have made any of these mistakes, don't be super upset about it. Learn from your mistakes. Don't make them in the future. But hopefully you're brand new. You're watching this for the first time. You're just about to launch. So you'll be able to take what we're talking about today and not make these mistakes when you are launching. The number one mistake to avoid when you're launching a clothing company is to not buy retail fabrics. I know it's super easy to go to your local fabric store, find a fabric that you like, make your samples out of it, and say well, when I'm ready for production, when I'm ready to do wholesale, I'll be able to find this fabric. And unfortunately, that is not always the case. The fabrics that you're finding at Vogue or, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking the store in New York that's really famous. Anyways, they are end lot fabrics. So when they're gone, they're gone. And it can be impossible, I was going to say next to impossible, but it can be impossible to find these fabrics from a wholesale vendor. The reason that you don't want to buy your fabrics from a retail store for your samples is you're going to make your samples and you're going to make sure that they fit properly, that you can wash them. You're going to make your photo shoots out of them. You're going to do your line sheets. And then back in the day when you would do wholesale, you would then take all of those wholesale samples to boutiques and you would shop them around. Then they would place orders and then you would produce your production 6 months after making those first samples. And that fabric store is not going to have that fabric, nor will they have enough of it for you to make your production. So then you're stuck at all of your buyers have seen your samples already and you're unable to make your production out of the same sample fabric. So I know it's really easy. And a lot of the fabrics at, Mood, that's the store, sorry. So a lot of these fabric stores have really beautiful fabrics and it's tempting to use these for your samples, but it's not setting you up for success in the bigger picture. So what you want to do is find wholesale vendors that provide small minimums and order your sample fabrics from there. Wholesale, where can I find these people? There's trade shows such as the Fabric Show, Textile World. I have a book, actually, I'm going to plug because it's a great resource. Let me grab it. The Apparel Industry Sourcing Book. These are all going to be small minimums. These are all vendors. So you can buy this book online. There's companies like Makers Row. So there's a ton of places that you can get connected with small minimum fabric vendors. So this is where you want to start when you're sourcing your fabrics for your samples. Make sure it's wholesale. Make sure that the fabric is reorderable. You'll want to ask, what's the continuity? Meaning, how many yards do you have? How long are you carrying this fabric? You'll want to make sure that if you do make your samples, that 6 months later, when you go to make your production, you'll be able to have that fabric. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes they run out. Sometimes they discontinue the fabric. So sometimes you hit a roadblock anyway, but the main way that you can avoid that is by using these wholesale vendors and by staying in contact with them. If they are running low on the fabric, if there isn't continuity, they just have X amount of yardage, stay close to them so you can stay on top of what types of or how much yardage they have of the fabric you're planning to use for production. All right, number 2, cutting corners. So number 1 is using retail fabrics for your wholesale products. Let's try and avoid that. Number 2 is cutting corners when it comes to your pattern making. I know pattern making is expensive. It takes a very skilled, very experienced, technical, mathematical brain to make a good pattern. And those people are hard to come by. And it's like working with in the trades or any other skilled laboring field, their hourly rate has, depending on the years of experience, they could have 30 years experience. Their hourly rate I've seen as high as $175 an hour. But if you use, say, an intern or a student and they just don't have the experience, you won't get patterns that are workable for production. And if you don't have a pattern, then you have nothing. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't sell. You can embroider it in diamonds and dip it in gold, that if it doesn't fit, it's not going to sell. And the best way to get that garment to fit is to hire an experienced pattern maker. Make sure that they have made production patterns. Make sure that they are familiar in your type of product. A knitwear pattern maker is very different than a men's suiting pattern maker. There's different rules, there's different technicalities. So make sure that you're working with an experienced pattern maker. It's not worth cutting corners when it comes to pattern making. When it's things like even sewing sometimes, like your grandma is an excellent sewer. She's been sewing since she was a little girl. Fine, she can make your samples. But when it comes to pattern making, you really need someone with the experience of making production patterns. So there are other places that you can cut corners, but pattern making is not one of them. So please invest in good patterns. If you have good patterns made for your first season, these patterns you're going to reuse as blocks for all of your seasons to come. So it's worth the investment. And that is, it's expensive to get good patterns made. So work it into your budget, which is going to bring me to my number 3 mistake to avoid is make sure that in the beginning, you've sat down and you've made a budget all the way through. So when I say all the way through, I'm saying patterns, samples, everything that you're going to need, including your photo shoots, your marketing. And then we're going to assume that you're going to have to do your photo shoots and your marketing before you start selling. So you should be developing the samples of your next collection. You should be developing your samples of your next collection while you are selling the production of your first. And I got a comment, it's not too expensive, at least in Turkey. That is true when you're working offshore for your pattern making. It is less expensive. There are different labor laws. There's different experiences. We do have a lack of like the trades of pattern making and sample making here in the States, whereas in Turkey, it's more readily available and more readily taught. So the communication can be difficult when you're getting patterns made offshore. So sometimes that comes in the way of like getting that perfect pattern. But yes, it is less expensive if you're doing pattern making offshore. All right, I'm trying to keep up with your comments as we're doing this as well. So number 3 is budgeting. You want to make sure that you have budgeted for everything. And if you're saying like, I don't know how to do that, you can sit down with someone like me and I can take you through what to expect for production of 50 units, 1,000 units, for a cotton fabric, how many yields you're using. So you can sit down with a professional that has experience within your industry to be able to put together this plan of where you're spending your money. Because let's say that you spend all your money on production and then you have no money to do your photo shoot, to do your marketing campaign, to put together your website. All of that you've done is kind of for nothing because no one's going to know that you exist. And you need great photos. You need a website. You'll need all of these things in order to be successful. So please sit down. I know it can be scary, but it's meant to be empowering. After I sit down with my designers and we have a full plan of the budget, then when they get hit with like, oh my gosh, I have to spend $10,000 on my fabric for production, and like they get this sticker shock, I can say, no, we put this into your budget. Go back to the budget, show that we put the $10,000 for the fabrics and the materials within the budget. So you're still within your means and everything's going to be okay. So it's actually empowering to have this budget created prior to moving in blind. Even if you are a billionaire, you'll want to have a plan in place for your budget so that you know you can get a return on your investment. All right. So number 4 is changing your mind. Oh, this one's tough because you want to get it perfect. You want to love it, but if you're changing your mind too much throughout the process, it is prolonging the process. Your manufacturer, your pattern maker, your sample maker is going to get frustrated. It's going to waste money and time. Sorry, I'm seeing questions pop up. It's going to waste money and time if you continue to change your mind when you're in the development process. So you want to be clear in your sketches and in your fabrications, create a mood board, really feel confident in what you're doing before you start jumping in. Because once you start making patterns, sourcing fabrics, putting in POs and orders to the factory, it's a done deal. So getting clear in the beginning before you jump in so that you have less changes. Now, if you do a sample and the fabric's not reacting the way you want, you can change the fabric. I don't want to make it seem like you can't make any changes, but they'll want to be for good reasons, not because you're getting cold feet or you don't know if the garment should be this way or that way and you keep going back and forth. So really be clear, make decisions confidently because it costs too much time and money. And as a new designer, time and money really matters. So get clear in the beginning. I have a question. What about the subject buttons and accessories? There are minimum quantities with customizing especially. Yes, there are. So I will probably do another live on that and accessories and meeting minimums when you're doing customizing. So yes, you are correct. But I'm going to stay on topic here with the 10 mistakes. But if I do a complimentary strategy session, so if anyone's here and you want to ask me specific questions that maybe not revolve around what I'm talking about today, 20 minutes, you can go to my website, book on my calendar, and we can go over whatever questions you may have. Yes. Okay. So number 5 is not wash testing, ironing, dry cleaning, testing, everything that your client is going to do to your garment prior to production. Please, please, please don't forget to wash test your garment. I have seen, and this is even like, we've already made this garment, but we're doing it in blue instead of purple. And it turns out, for whatever reason, the blue, when you apply heat, shrinks the length by 2 inches. I have worked with a client, this is years ago, where we could not figure out why the purple garments were shorter than the blue garments. And it came to turn out it was before she had worked with us, but she didn't wash test her garments. So when heat was applied just to that fabric, it shrank, just to that colorway. So you'll want to always, when you do your production, wash test your garments. When you first get your fabrics, before you even make your garments, you can wash test, cut out a square and draw in permanent marker 12 by 12. Measure it 12 by 12, wash it, dry it, measure that 12 by 12 square again and see how much it shrank. If it shrank by anything more than 4%, that's going to affect the fit after it is washed. So you may want to consider using a different fabric, or if it's just the length and not the width, maybe you'll make the pants a little bit longer so that when they shrink, it won't affect the fit, but you'll want to take that into consideration when you're making the pattern, or pre-wash your fabrics. So before your fabrics get cut, they all have to be pre-washed, but you'll want to know that before you cut anything, and you'll want to work that into your budget because it is an additional cost. So wash test everything, please. And that goes for heat transfers. That goes for if you're going to be applying screen testing, if you're going to be doing any sort of finishings to the fabrics. Gosh, I've seen like you have a red dyed button and it bleeds onto the white fabric when it's put into the wash. So just please test everything, test it again. And that will prevent these mistakes happening in your customer's hands. So that's number 5. For those that are just joining, I'll go ahead and recap the first 5 for you. It is number 1, buying retail fabric for wholesale products. Number 2, cutting corners when it comes to your pattern making. Number 3, not properly budgeting all the way through your production. Number 4, changing your mind when you're in the development process. Number 5, not wash testing your garments. Number 6, now this one I wrote skipping the TP, which actually can mean 2 things when I wrote it down. So you're going to get 2 tips of mistakes to avoid. One is skipping your tech pack. You'll want to do a tech pack even if your factory says, no, we don't need tech packs. The tech packs are actually there to protect you and your garment so that you have directions for the factory when they don't know, like, is this supposed to be a 1/2 inch or is this a 1/4? And, maybe they don't have a perfect sample, but they should have a perfect sample to go by. They go back to this tech pack, which is the blueprint to have everything, every kind of detail, sewing, spec measurements, everything is in that tech pack. So it's like the Bible for what and how your garment is supposed to be sewn. And when you get your production and if it doesn't match to spec, or if there is something that you had asked that wasn't there and it is in the tech pack, that is helpful in negotiation with the factory to getting them to fix that mistake. So please remember to make tech packs. When we're working offshore, we do a more detailed tech pack than we're doing domestically. So it doesn't always need to have spec measurements, but you'll want to have something there in place so that there is something they can reference if they have questions about your garment. And then the second, since I wrote TP, it could also mean top of production. Top of production is when all of your garments are already, Amy Page, hi Amy, I've made that mistake. I love you, Amy. Thanks for joining. We should do an interview where you could talk about it. So yes, when you're doing top of production, that is all of your garments are cut. Everything's already in place. Like you can't make any changes to your pattern, but you make one garment just to double check everything before you do production. I would recommend doing this every time. Anytime you're in a new production, anytime you switch a fabric, you switch a trim, just make a top of production sample. Just make sure everything is okay. Make sure the manufacturer understands the project. It's just a great way to confirm, and it shouldn't cost you any extra. If they've already cut your production, then just to do one sample of that production should not cost you extra. It's included in that production price. So don't skip the tech pack or the top of production. Number 7 is planning a fashion show, a trade show, or having some event planned before you have the deadline given to you by the pattern maker, the sample maker, the manufacturer, whoever is in charge of getting you those samples. So I know that when you sit down and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be launching in, let's say it's September now, I'm going to launch in spring. So that means I'm going to have my photo shoot in January, and you decide you're going to have your photo shoot in January. Well, you want to make sure when you're talking to your factories, when you're sourcing your materials, when you're doing all of that, that January photo shoot is in alignment with what they can give you. Let's say you go to the sample maker and you say, hey, I have a photo shoot in January. You've already paid your photographer, you've hired your models, and they can't fit you in. Then you've lost all that money, because a lot of times the photographers won't reimburse you. If you've booked the models, you can't get that money back. If you are going to do a trade show, they definitely won't give you the money back. So you want to work backwards with all of the deadlines as a team. You don't want to just walk in and say, I need this in a week, because they might give you it in a week, but it'll be poor quality, or they won't have all the materials they need, and it won't be perfect. And you want your samples to be perfect for any sort of event you're having. So make sure that you are not planning a photo shoot or an important event where you need samples prior to having that deadline given to you by the person that's actually in charge of making those samples. This also goes into the next mistake, number 8, is creating a realistic timeline. When you're starting your fashion line, you're very excited, and you want to launch in 3 months. It's not possible. Ordering the fabric, when I talk to new designers and they have this sort of unrealistic deadlines and timelines, that's the first thing that I'll kind of rework with them. Real quick, we're going to do sourcing your materials. Then we're going to do your patterns. Then we're going to do your prototype. Then we're going to do a fitting. Then we're going to do alterations. Then we're going to do another prototype. Then we're going to do another fitting. Then we're going to do alterations. Then we're going to do your sample. Then we're going to do your final sample. Then we're going to develop your size chart. Then we're going to grade and digitize your patterns. Then we're going to do your size check run of checking the different sizes. And then you're going to go into production, which can take 3 months. So right there, if we squished all of that into 3 months, we would have to skip steps. So I'm always very, very clear on how long this takes. If you're working with a company like mine, we've already got the vendor relationships. We know where to source things. We have great manufacturers that are vetted. We can launch a line in 6 to 9 months. But if you're developing anything customized, if you're making customized prints, fabrics, hardware, you'll want to add that to the timeline. If you're doing things offshore, add that to the timeline. If you're new to the business and you have to find all of these resources from scratch, you want to give yourself at least a year. I know that seems crazy, but it's better to launch with something really amazing and perfect and that you're proud of, instead of rush it and go to market with something that isn't going to sell. Okay, so number 9 is not planning your marketing and your photo shoots. So you have a really, really great product, but you don't have professional photos. Nowadays, things are just purchased off of photos, your website, your Instagram, like everything is done through photos. So it is important to plan out and invest in a marketing plan, a good photo shoot, making sure that you have a photographer that understands your vision. It's always painful when I have a client that has a beautiful gown and then they end up taking their own photos and they don't have a professional model and they use their iPhone. And like, if those are fine for Instagram and for content, but for your website, you'll want to have really clean professional photos that will help sell your garment. So make sure that you plan for that. All right. And the number 10, this one is really, really important. Make sure that you are mindful with all the connections that you make within the industry. It is a very small industry, and we know each other. We're friends. We've seen each other for over a decade at trade shows or different events. So really, we help each other out. And if maybe I can't help you, I can give you a name of somebody that can. And you meeting other designers, if you view them instead of competition, but as like your colleagues, people that will help you grow within the industry, then you can grow together and help each other out. So being mindful in all of your connections is really, really important. I have a question. I have a note about washing process. If the buttons leak during the washing, that's the defect of the button. It shouldn't get good color. So yes, your buttons shouldn't leak, but unfortunately, sometimes they do. So you want to do the wash testing, make sure that they don't. So yes, being very mindful of your connections and like building your network of vendors, people that you've worked with, other designers, people that would be considered competition. Like it's not an easy industry. So being able to band together and help each other and ask each other for advice is huge. You don't want to work just on an island, burning all bridges and like creating fires everywhere you go, because eventually you will run out of people that will help you and want to work with you. Your factories can really make or break you when it comes to your production. So you'll want them on your team. You'll want them to feel like they're part of the process and your growth. So yes, be mindful with all the connections that you make within the industry. Okay, so I'll run through the 10 mistakes really quickly for those of you that weren't here the whole time. But this will also live forever on both the Instagram and the YouTube. So LinkedIn and Facebook. It'll be everywhere. So you can watch it again and again and take notes. But like I said, I offer a complimentary 20-minute strategy. If you ever wanted more details, you can go to the website, book that directly on the website. Okay, number 1, buying retail fabrics for wholesale products. Number 2, cutting corners when it comes to pattern making. 3, not budgeting properly all the way through the process. Number 4, changing your mind when it's in the development process or in production. Number 5, not wash testing, dry cleaning, anything that's going to happen to your product. Number 6, skipping your tech pack or your top of production. Number 7, planning a fashion show, a trade show, or a photo shoot before you've talked to whoever is in charge of making your samples and they've given you a realistic timeline. Number 8 is creating a realistic timeline. Number 9 is not planning for your marketing process and your photo shoot properly. And number 10, being mindful with all of your connections. So there you have it. Those are 10 mistakes to avoid as a new designer. We will be here every Wednesday at 12:30 for more tips and tricks of the industry. So thanks so much. I'll see you next time. I guess I'm just on the Instagram if anybody has any questions.